The wind whispered through the trees as the last light of day slipped behind the pines. A weary hiker stumbled upon a small cabin deep in the wilderness, its chimney breathing smoke, its windows glowing with the comfort of firelight. Inside, the warmth felt almost human, the kind that eases more than cold bones. But on the wooden table lay a note, edges curled with age, his name written across it in careful strokes. He hadn't told anyone where he was going. The handwriting was familiar, though he couldn't say why. Outside, the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Who could have known he'd come this way, and why warn him not to stay until sunrise? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Snow whispered beneath his boots as Daniel Holt followed the thinning trail. His breath came in slow clouds, each one vanishing into the pale air like a memory. He had been walking for days, though time felt shapeless in this wilderness. Hunger gnawed quietly, but grief gnawed louder. It had been 2 years since Elaine's passing, yet her absence still shadowed every thought. He had promised her he'd scatter her ashes where they first met, at the old ridge overlooking the valley, but the storm had driven him off course. He carried her urn, wrapped in flannel, inside his pack, close to his heart. Every few hours he'd touch it, like checking that she was still there. The forest around him stretched endless, blanketed in snow that shimmered with faint blue light. Somewhere beyond the trees he imagined he could hear her humming, soft, almost like the wind. The compass, his father's brass relic, swung faintly in his hand. It had always guided him right until now. The needle quivered uncertainly, as if the forest itself resisted direction. Daniel chuckled without humor. "Guess even you've had enough of me," he murmured to the cold metal. He stopped to rest against a fallen log. His knees ached. Age reminded him of its presence in every movement. In his youth, these woods had been his refuge, the place where he and Elaine built a life. They'd hiked, laughed, even named the creek that wound through the valley below. Silverbone, she'd called it, because the light on the water reminded her of ribs under skin. He smiled at the thought, then for the first time that day he felt watched. The forest grew too still. The wind paused mid-breath. Daniel looked around and nothing. Only pines, tall and solemn, their branches heavy with snow. Still, something had changed. He checked his compass again. The needle spun in slow circles. He pressed on, boots crunching rhythmically, until the trees thinned and he spotted faint smoke in the distance. Relief flared in his chest. A cabin, perhaps a ranger station or hunter's lodge, warmth, shelter. He picked up his pace, though every step seemed to stretch the distance farther. When he reached the clearing, twilight was fading fast. The cabin stood in the hollow like a secret. Rough-hewn logs, roof sagging slightly, yet alive with faint light from within. Smoke curled lazily from its chimney. The door creaked open under his touch. Inside, warmth embraced him. A fire glowed in the hearth, soft and steady. On a small table rested a tin kettle, still warm to the touch. Someone had been here moments ago. "Hello," he called out. His voice echoed too clearly. No answer. He removed his gloves, rubbing his hands together near the fire. The comfort almost broke him. 2 days of cold, hunger, and silence. This place felt like mercy itself. Yet something in his gut tightened. Too perfect, too prepared. He looked around. There were framed photos on the wall, faded yellowing. Families in winter coats, children grinning, a dog at their feet. He didn't recognize anyone, yet one photograph near the window caught his eye. A man standing beside a woman, their arms around each other. The cabin behind them looked identical to this one. The man's face tugged at his memory. He stepped closer, squinting in the firelight. It couldn't be. The man looked like him, younger but unmistakably him. Daniel felt his stomach twist. He tore his gaze away and sat down, trying to steady his breathing. "You're tired," he muttered to himself. "Your mind's playing tricks." He reached for the compass again, but it lay still now, frozen as if it refused to move. He sighed and leaned back in the chair. "Elaine," he whispered, "maybe this is where I stop for the night." Maybe this is where you'd want me to rest, but outside, the forest whispered in reply. Faint, shifting, almost like a warning. He didn't yet notice the note on the table, folded neatly beside the kettle. Waiting. The fire's crackle filled the room with a kind of heartbeat. Daniel stared into it for a long while, letting the warmth seep into his bones. The glow danced across the cabin's walls, throwing long shadows that shifted with every gust of wind outside. He should have felt safe, but something in the air pressed heavy, like a memory refusing to stay buried. He noticed the lantern on the windowsill. It was still lit, flame steady and silent behind glass. Strange, oil lamps didn't burn long unattended. He leaned closer and saw the wick freshly trimmed. Someone had cared for it not long ago. "Hello?" He called again, softer this time. "Anyone here?" His voice came back to him, muffled and strange. The table sat at the center of the room, simple pine with one chair drawn out. On it lay a folded paper, edges browned by age, its crease sharp and deliberate. Daniel's name was written across it, not just the first, but the full name, Daniel Holt. His throat went dry. He hadn't spoken that name aloud since the funeral. He reached for it carefully, as though the note might crumble under his fingers. The ink shimmered faintly, dark and alive. He opened it slowly. "Do not stay until sunrise." That was all. No signature, no explanation. Just those 6 words. Daniel read it again. The handwriting stirred something deep inside him. It was tidy, deliberate, someone who wrote with care, not haste. He knew it, but from where? He tried to remember, but the thought slipped away like snow from his glove. He folded the note back and looked around. The fire still burned, but its woodpile hadn't diminished. He hadn't added anything since entering, yet the flames fed themselves. He rubbed his temples, thinking of exhaustion, altitude, dehydration, any rational explanation. He found a small kitchen tucked behind a half wall. Cans lined the shelves, some rusted, some newer. On the counter stood a kettle, still steaming. He lifted the lid. Water, not tea. He poured himself a cup anyway. The warmth steadied him, but the silence pressed harder. No wind, no creak of timber. Even the forest outside seemed to hold its breath. A clock above the fireplace caught his eye. Its brass pendulum hung motionless. He leaned closer and saw the hands frozen at 3:17. He tapped the glass. Nothing. The air around it felt colder, heavier. He turned back toward the door, thinking maybe he should leave, find another trail, even sleep under a tree if he had to. But the idea of stepping back into the dark made his stomach knot. The fire's glow looked too kind, too forgiving. He sat again, staring at the flames. His thoughts drifted to Elaine, her laugh, her quiet strength, her way of making silence feel full instead of empty. He wondered what she'd say now. Probably that he was overthinking it, that a man who spent his life in forests shouldn't fear the sound of one. He smiled faintly. "You'd call me foolish, wouldn't you?" A faint thud came from outside. He froze. Another sound, softer this time, like someone stepping carefully in the snow. He rose slowly, eyes fixed on the door. The lantern flickered once, then steadied. "Hello?" His voice cracked against the quiet. Nothing. He stepped closer to the door, pressing his ear against the wood. The sound was gone now, replaced by the faint groan of wind through the pines. He waited a long minute before exhaling and turning away. When he looked back at the table, the note was no longer where he'd left it. It lay open now, perfectly centered, the words glinting in firelight. And beneath the warning, faint and new, another line had appeared, the ink still drying. "You've already stayed once before." Daniel staggered back, heart pounding. The air seemed to pulse with heat. He blinked, but the words remained. His mind scrambled for logic, condensation, trick of light, hallucination. But his hands trembled all the same. He reached for the compass instinctively. The needle no longer moved at all. Outside, snow began to fall again, heavy and slow. Burying his footprints, the fire snapped once, bright as lightning, and in that flash, he thought he saw movement in the window, a shadow leaning in, watching. The shadow vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears, louder than the fire's hiss. He stumbled toward the window, his breath fogging the glass, but there was nothing outside, only snow, endless and blinding under the moonlight. Still, the feeling of being watched clung to him, thick and electric. He grabbed his backpack, thinking he'd leave right then. But when he opened the door, the forest was gone. Not vanished, replaced. The trail had disappeared under a sheet of snow, so deep and untouched that even the cabin steps had been swallowed. The trees stood farther apart now, stretched and twisted, their silhouettes wrong, as though the forest had grown in a single breath. He shut the door quickly and pressed his back to it. "I'm dreaming," he whispered. "Just a dream." He turned and saw something new on the table, a small wooden music box that hadn't been there before. Artifact, the music box, carved from dark birch, etched with looping vines and tiny mountain flowers. Its key was already wound tight, waiting. Daniel stared at it. The carvings were intricate, far beyond what any traveler would carry. His name, or something close to it, was scratched into the underside. D. Holt, 1982. He hadn't even been born then. He hesitated, then flipped open the lid. The melody began softly, a delicate waltz that seemed familiar yet impossible to place. It filled the cabin like a heartbeat returned, slow and mournful. The flames dimmed as though bowing to the tune. Each note echoed into the wood, sinking deep, making the air shimmer. Then faintly he heard something underneath the music. A whisper. Not from outside. From beneath the floor, Daniel froze. The sound was too soft to make out words, but the rhythm matched the song perfectly, as if someone down there was humming along. He kneeled, ear pressed to the floorboards. The wood was cold, too cold, almost metallic. "Hello!" The whisper stopped. A moment later, something tapped back 3 times. He jumped up, knocking over the chair. No, that's not—" He cut himself off. The fire flared high, spilling light across the far wall, and for an instant Daniel saw outlines burned into it, silhouettes of people standing shoulder to shoulder, all facing him. The light faded. The wall was empty again. He turned toward the music box. The melody slowed, distorting, each note bending downward like it was melting. The air grew colder. The lantern dimmed. Then from inside the box the music stopped, but the whisper didn't. It was clearer now. A woman's voice. "Daniel!" He staggered back, heart racing. "Who are you?" No answer, just the faint sound of breathing. He slammed the lid shut and the sound ceased instantly. The box went silent and lifeless in his hand. He dropped it onto the table and stepped away. The note on the table was gone again. He searched the floor, the shelves, even under the rug, but it had vanished completely. Then his eyes caught something near the hearth, the edge of a photograph poking out from beneath a log bucket. He pulled it free. It showed the same cabin, but older, roof sagging, door missing, snow piled inside. In the foreground stood a woman wrapped in a fur coat, smiling faintly. Her eyes were bright and distant, as though seeing something beyond the lens. Behind her, faintly visible through the window, was a man, watching her from inside the cabin. Daniel turned it over. In the same handwriting as the note, it read, "The last to arrive always forgets." He stared at the photo until his hands shook. The woman's face stirred something deep in his chest. Not memory exactly, but recognition. He sat down hard, staring at the floor. He tried to piece it together. The compass, the note, the music box, now this. Nothing fit. None of it should exist here. The fire crackled once more, and for a fleeting moment the flames shaped themselves into a human silhouette, arms reaching outward before collapsing into ash. Daniel's voice broke the silence. "If you're real, tell me what you want." The air shifted, a faint gust brushing his cheek. The clock above the mantel clicked once. The pendulum moved. Then the same voice from before whispered again. Closer this time, right beside his ear, remember. The flames rose violently, lighting the whole cabin in a sudden burst of orange. When they dimmed again, Daniel was alone, except for the music box, now open, playing itself once more. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat slouched in the chair by the fire, watching the embers fade into faint red veins beneath blackened wood. The music box had stopped some time before dawn, but he hadn't dared touch it again. Each time he thought about stepping outside, he saw the snow swallowing the forest, a white void that pulsed with silence. When the first dull light seeped through the windows, he forced himself up. His body ached, his throat dry. He reached for his canteen, empty. He needed water, maybe air, maybe sanity. He pulled on his jacket and opened the door. The morning was strange. The trees were still wrong, too tall, their tops lost in mist. He couldn't hear birds or wind, only the brittle creak of the snow beneath his boots. He walked a few paces, turned back, and froze. The cabin looked older, the wood was darker, warped. The chimney leaned. The smoke was gone. And when he looked at the window, the same window he'd just stepped through, someone was standing there, not moving, just watching. Daniel blinked hard, heart hammering. The figure was gone. He stumbled backward and almost tripped over something half buried in snow. A rusted lantern, its glass cracked, its handle wrapped in frozen cloth. Artifact, the rusted lantern, an old forest lamp engraved with initials E.H., containing soot that smells faintly of pine tar. It becomes Daniel's only reliable source of light when night returns. He picked it up carefully. It felt warm, impossibly like someone had just used it. He brushed the snow off the initials. E.H., he whispered. The woman in the photograph? Back inside, he set the lantern beside the music box. They looked like they belonged together, relics from a story he hadn't lived yet. He needed to think. He checked his compass again, still spinning uselessly. The needle trembled as if afraid to settle. He tapped the glass. It stopped, pointing toward the fireplace. Daniel frowned. He kneeled and looked beneath the hearthstones. One was loose. He pried it free and found a small metal ring, blackened with soot. He pulled, and a square of wood shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a journal, its cover stiff with age. He opened it carefully. The first page bore the same handwriting from the note. For the one who finds this place, the forest is not a maze. It is a memory. The pages that followed were filled with sketches, trees with human faces, maps drawn in circles, strange markings that looked like eyes. In the margins were words that seemed written in haste. She doesn't know what she's become. The song holds her here. If you see her, don't let her speak your name. Daniel's hands trembled. He flipped further. Toward the end, a line stopped him cold. He'll come again, just like before. Always the same, always forgetting. He stared at it until the room tilted. The handwriting. It wasn't just familiar. It was his. He dropped the book as if burned. No, he whispered. That's not. The floorboards creaked. He turned. Someone stood by the door. It was a woman, the same one from the photograph. Pale skin, eyes like winter itself. Her clothes were old-fashioned, frayed at the edges, a fur collar dusted with snow. She looked at him as though seeing a ghost. Daniel, she said softly, his breath caught. The air turned brittle. Who are you? She smiled faintly. You came back. He stepped back, shaking his head. No, I don't know you. She took a slow step forward, eyes glinting in the firelight. You always say that. I've never... You found the note. He swallowed hard. What's happening here? She looked toward the music box, then the journal. You shouldn't have opened them. Why? What are they? Her gaze softened. Pieces. Of us. Daniel stared at her, lost between disbelief and a creeping certainty that something deep inside him recognized her voice. She lifted the lantern from the table, her hand passing through his sleeve as she did, not fully, but enough that he felt cold bloom across his arm. Before sunrise, she whispered, You must leave. If you stay, the forest will remember you again. Remember me. She smiled sadly. It never forgets what it creates, the fire guttered. A gust of wind slammed the door shut. Daniel blinked, and she was gone. Only the faint scent of pine and frost lingered. The lantern still glowed faintly where she'd touched it. He turned toward the journal again, flipping to the very last page. In faint, almost erased pencil marks, one final line read, Don't wait for dawn. The sun was already fading behind the clouds. By late afternoon, the forest dimmed under a grey veil, as though the sky itself grew tired of watching. Daniel packed what little he had, the journal, the music box, the lantern, and decided to leave before darkness set in. But every path he tried seemed to fold back toward the cabin. He marked trees with his knife, only to pass the same notches again an hour later. The forest was circling him. When he finally returned to the clearing, he wasn't even surprised. The cabin sat as it had before, smoke curling from the chimney once more. He hadn't lit the fire. Inside, everything was as he'd left it, except the journal. It now lay open on the table, turned to a page he didn't remember reading. If you find yourself walking in circles, you are not lost. You are being shown. His pulse quickened. The ink was still wet. He looked around. Who's doing this? A whisper rose from somewhere behind him, soft, almost human. You! He spun, but the room was empty. He grabbed the lantern and stepped outside again. The wind had picked up, tugging at his jacket. Night wasn't far. He turned toward the tree line and froze. The forest was no longer silent. A low hum drifted through the pines, deep and rhythmic, almost like chanting. It came from all directions, carried by the wind. He tightened his grip on the lantern. The flame inside flared brighter, as if reacting. The initials EH glowed faintly, casting tiny reflections across the snow. He turned it in his hand, noticing now that the brass bottom could twist loose. Inside the hollow base, he found something wrapped in brittle paper, a small silver key artifact. The silver key, a delicate, tarnished key engraved with a symbol resembling a tree's roots. It unlocks the cellar door hidden beneath the cabin. Connecting Daniel to a buried truth, he pocketed it, unsure why his hands were shaking. The chanting grew louder. He stepped closer to the trees, scanning the shadows. A figure darted between trunks, too fast to follow. Another appeared farther back, then vanished. Shapes, faint and translucent, moving like memories caught in the air. Daniel turned back toward the cabin. For a moment he thought he saw the woman again, in the window, holding the lantern. Then the vision flickered and was gone. He stumbled inside, bolting the door. The fire had gone out completely. Only the lantern cast light now, its glow steady and golden. He reached beneath the table, feeling along the floorboards until he found a small metal latch. He used the key. It turned with a faint click. A breath of stale, cold air rose from below. The cellar was narrow, steep stairs leading into darkness. The smell of earth and iron filled his lungs. He descended slowly, lantern in hand. At the bottom, the floor was dirt, uneven, damp. Against one wall stood several wooden crates, half collapsed with rot. In the far corner, something shimmered, a mirror, tall and freestanding, its glass fogged. Daniel stepped closer. The lantern light illuminated faint shapes beneath the dust, his own reflection, and behind it, another figure. The woman, she looked at him through the glass. Expression solemn. "You shouldn't have come back," she said softly. Daniel's reflection mouthed her words too. Perfectly in sync. "What do you mean back?" The mirror rippled. Her voice deepened, layered with echoes. "You've done this before. You always come when the fire still burns." He reached out. His fingertips brushed the cold surface. The reflection didn't follow. The glass was solid, but her eyes felt alive. "Who are you?" he whispered. Her gaze softened, and for a moment pain crossed her face. "I was you once." The lantern flickered violently. The cellar walls groaned, a faint moan rising from the ground itself. Daniel stumbled back, shaking his head. "That's not possible." "You left me here," she said. "When the forest took you, it made me stay." The hum outside swelled into a roar, the sound of countless voices chanting in unison. The mirror glowed, light pouring from its edges. Daniel shielded his eyes. "What do you want from me?" "To remember," she said. "So it can end." The light exploded, filling the cellar. When it dimmed, the woman was gone, and so was the mirror. In its place lay another note, written on old parchment, pinned to the wall with a rusted nail. It read, "At sunrise, the forest wakes. At sunset, it chooses." Daniel backed away slowly, clutching the lantern. Above, he heard the faint creak of footsteps moving across the cabin floor. His own. When he climbed back up, the air was colder. The door was open. Snow drifted inside, covering the floorboards in white dust. He stepped out and stared at the horizon. The light was dying, the sun barely visible behind the trees. He whispered to the wind, voice shaking. "What happens at sunrise?" From somewhere unseen, the woman's voice answered, a faint, almost tender. "You'll see. If you stay." The lantern's flame sputtered once, then steadied, and in that fragile glow, the forest began to move. Snow fell harder as dusk tightened its grip, each flake swirling like ash from some invisible fire. Daniel stood by the door, watching as the trees swayed in rhythm, to the faint hum still echoing through the forest. He thought of the note. "At sunrise, the forest wakes." The words sat heavy in his chest. Whatever was waiting for dawn, it wasn't salvation. He closed the door and fed the lantern a bit more oil. The flame pulsed brighter, throwing long shadows across the walls. The warmth should have comforted him, but instead it only reminded him how empty the room had become. The journal lay open on the table again. He hadn't touched it. A new line had appeared at the bottom of the page, written in that same unnervingly familiar hand. "If you wish to leave, burn the lantern before the sun returns." He stared at it, stunned. "Burn it?" he muttered. The lantern's metal shell seemed to hum faintly in response, as though it were listening. He turned it in his hands, the initials EH now faintly glowing red. Outside, the chanting had faded, replaced by a low, steady rhythm, a heartbeat beneath the earth. He looked toward the cellar door. The mirror was gone, but the scent of iron still hung in the air. Whatever that place was, it wasn't just a basement. It was a memory well. He thought about the woman's words. "You left me here." The weight of them pressed against his ribs. Who was she? He whispered to himself. "Who am I here?" He flipped through the journal again, scanning earlier entries. The handwriting shifted, sometimes neat, sometimes frantic. There were drawings of the cabin in various states of decay, and lists of names crossed out violently. Near the middle of the book, he found an entry dated 40 years earlier. "I can still hear him upstairs. He knocks 3 times before the door opens. I light the lantern and he becomes me again." Daniel exhaled sharply. The more he read, the more he realized the he in the journal might not be someone else. It might be every version of himself that had ever found this place. He slammed the journal shut. "No," he said out loud. "That's insane." But the air shifted in reply. A slow groan through the rafters, the kind that sounded like laughter buried in wood. He moved to the window. The trees seemed closer now, their trunks forming a pattern, not random but deliberate, like standing stones marking a circle. In the center, a faint blue light flickered. He hesitated. The forest wanted him to come. He grabbed his coat and the lantern. The light from within flickered, but held steady as he stepped into the night. The snow crunched underfoot, muffled by the endless hush of the trees. The blue glow led him deeper, winding through narrow paths until he reached a clearing. In the center stood an old stone altar, half covered by frost, carved with symbols that matched those in the journal's sketches. On top of it sat the music box. He froze. He'd left it on the table. The lid was open, the melody faint but steady, playing that same haunting tune. The snow around the altar pulsed with each note, light rising and falling like breath. "Why are you doing this to me?" Daniel shouted into the trees. The forest replied with silence, then a whisper. His own voice. "Because you asked it to." He stumbled backward, the lantern swinging wildly. Shadows stretched, curling into figures. Echoes of himself, each one holding the same lantern, each face gaunt and desperate. They stepped from between the trees, surrounding the clearing. He dropped to his knees, clutching the lantern to his chest. "No, I'm not one of you." The figures spoke as one, their voices layered. "You are the first and the last. The one who remembers enough to end it." The music box clicked, its tune slowing, breaking apart. Daniel forced himself to his feet. "What is this place?" The nearest figure stepped closer. "A loop made of choices. You built it, Daniel, to escape forgetting." He shook his head violently. "That's not possible." "I've never—" "You always say that," it interrupted. You always will. The music box gave one last trembling note, then silence. The forest exhaled, wind slicing through the clearing. Every shadow vanished. The lantern's flame guttered, leaving only the faint red glow of the initials. Daniel stood alone again. Snow fell softly over the altar. The music box was gone. He turned back toward the cabin, his breath ragged, each step heavier than the last. At the tree line, he looked up and froze. The woman stood in the doorway, lantern light spilling across her pale face. She held the journal in her hands. Her voice carried across the distance, calm and certain. "You're almost ready to remember." Then she blew out her lantern. His followed suit without his touch. Darkness swallowed everything. When Daniel woke, there was no light, not from the lantern, not from the fire, not from the sky. Only a grey haze lingered where the world should have been. His breath fogged the air, though he couldn't feel the cold anymore. For a long moment he thought he was dead. Then he heard it, the sound of dripping water, slow, steady, echoing like it came from far underground. He reached for the lantern. It was cold but not dead. When he turned the knob, a faint blue flame flickered to life. Quieter, softer than before, he was no longer in the cabin. The room around him was stone, rough-hewn and damp. The air tasted of iron and moss. There were no windows, only a narrow archway leading into a deeper corridor. Carvings lined the walls, trees, faces, eyes. He raised the lantern to one of them and froze. They weren't carvings. They were impressions. Faces pressed into the stone, like the wall had swallowed people whole. A voice came from the corridor ahead, faint, female, the same soft tone that haunted his dreams. "Daniel." He followed, careful with each step. The passage turned and narrowed until it opened into a vast cavern. In the center stood a massive tree, its roots half buried in rock, its branches glowing faintly with light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Beneath it was a small wooden box, identical to the one he'd seen on the altar, the music box. He approached slowly. The air vibrated around it, humming faintly with that same old tune. His fingers brushed the lid. Click. The melody began again, but this time words whispered beneath it, his own voice overlapping with others, fragments of memory breaking through. "You promised you wouldn't come back. The fire burns until one forgets. She was never meant to stay." He stepped back, trembling. "What do you want from me?" The light from the tree pulsed faster. From behind the roots, the woman emerged. The same familiar face, but now shadowed, her eyes burning faintly blue. "I told you to leave before sunrise," she said. Voice soft but urgent. "I tried," Daniel said. "It brought me back," she nodded slowly. "It always does. The forest doesn't release its maker easily." "What does that mean?" "I didn't make this." She stepped closer. Her expression was both sorrowful and knowing. "You did, long ago. You built it to remember her." "Her?" The woman smiled faintly. "Me." The realization hit him like ice. "You're saying I created you?" Her gaze dropped. "You lost someone? A wife, a child?" "I don't remember anymore. You tried to rebuild what the fire took, piece by piece, from memory. The cabin, the forest, me, but it went wrong." Daniel's knees weakened. No, that's not—" "You've been walking this path for years, Daniel," she whispered. "Every time you return, you forget why you came. You think you're lost, but you're retracing your own sorrow." The music slowed. The light dimmed. "If that's true," he said quietly, "then how do I end it?" She looked at the lantern. "You already know." He glanced down. The initials EH glowed again, brighter now, almost burning. "You?" he asked. She nodded. "Evelyn Hart." The name hit him like thunder. His wife's name. Memories began to surface. Flashes of laughter by a campfire, a ring of trees, her voice humming that same tune the music box played. A storm, a fire, the scream. Then nothing but ash. He dropped the lantern. It didn't break, but the flame inside flared wildly, spilling light across the cavern. The faces in the stone walls turned toward him, eyes glinting, mouths opening in silent cries. Evelyn reached out. "You have to let it burn, Daniel." He shook his head. "If I burn it, I lose you again." She smiled, tender, sad. You never had to lose me. You just had to remember. The ground began to tremble. The tree's light spread upward, splitting the ceiling with cracks of blue-white brilliance. Do it, she shouted. Daniel picked up the lantern, tears blurring his vision. He opened the cap and poured its contents, thick oil, onto the roots of the glowing tree. The flame roared to life, devouring the wood, spreading through the cavern. The air filled with heat and light, and 1,000 voices crying out in release. Evelyn's form flickered. She stepped forward, pressing her hand to his cheek, warm, human, real for the first time. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she was gone. The tree collapsed inward, flames twisting into spirals that consumed the darkness. Daniel felt the ground fall away, the world folding around him, light and sound dissolving into nothing. He fell through silence. And then, somewhere far above the smoke, he heard the first song of morning birds. The night deepened into a silence so complete it felt alive. The hiker stood by the cabin window, watching the fog thicken like breath over glass. Somewhere in that whiteness, something moved, slow, deliberate, aware of him. He turned off the lantern, letting darkness swallow the room. The only light came from the fire, now a faint glow of embers. He listened. The wind had died, and even the trees seemed to hold their breath. Then a soft tap, not loud but close, like knuckles brushing against wood. He froze. The sound came again, rhythmic, almost patient. He turned toward the door, every nerve screaming. The handle twitched once, then stopped. He didn't dare breathe. Minutes or hours passed before he heard retreating steps crunching over the frozen soil. He wanted to believe it was just an animal, but the steps were too slow, too heavy, too human. When he finally worked up the courage to move, he bolted the door with a rusted latch he'd found under the counter. Then he saw it, something lying just inside the threshold. A small strip of paper, torn and damp from the fog. On it were 3 words written in shaky ink, "Not your cabin." His stomach turned. He threw the paper into the dying fire, watching the edges curl and blacken. The note burned quickly, but not before he caught a faint mark on the corner, an initial or maybe a symbol. It looked like the same looping mark from the first letter he'd found when he arrived. The forest outside exhaled a low moan, as if warning him not to ignore it. He stayed awake until dawn, gripping the iron poker beside the fire. The light that finally crept through the window was dull and colorless, but it felt like salvation. When he opened the door, the air was sharp with frost. There were footprints in the dirt outside, clear, human, circling the cabin twice before vanishing toward the woods. He followed them for only a few steps before realizing something even worse. They weren't leading away from the forest. They led toward it, his own. He turned back. The cabin looked smaller, older, as if the night had aged it. Inside, the air carried a smell he hadn't noticed before. Smoke and iron, and something faintly sweet. Blood. By midday, he found the courage to open the cellar door again. The steps were damp, the air cold enough to sting. At the bottom, the light of his flashlight swept across the stone floor and stopped. There was another note pinned to a wooden beam. "You've been here before." The words blurred as panic tightened his throat. He stumbled back, his light shaking. Beneath the note, someone had carved deep marks into the wood. Not words, numbers, a date. His date of birth. He dropped the flashlight. The beam spun wildly, landing on a small object near the wall. A compass, its casing cracked, its needle spinning erratically. He picked it up, and the moment his fingers touched it, an image flashed in his mind. A child standing by the same cabin door, holding that compass, calling for someone in the dark. The sound of the wind above broke him from the trance. He ran back upstairs, heart hammering, but the moment he reached the main room, he froze. Someone had written on the fogged window from the outside. "Don't remember." He backed away, trembling. The words began to drip as the fog melted into water. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the window waiting for movement. Every crackle of wood, every groan of the old floorboards twisted his nerves tighter. Somewhere in the distance, an owl cried, a lonely, broken sound, and then, faintly through the trees, came the echo of a child's laughter, The laughter faded into the mist, leaving behind an echo that didn't quite die. The hiker stood by the window, unsure if it had been real or some cruel trick of exhaustion. His reflection wavered against the glass, pale and ghost-like, and for a moment he thought he saw someone else's eyes staring back, younger, frightened. Familiar? He stumbled away from the window and lit another lantern. The weak flame revealed the disarray of the cabin, the half-burned note, the scattered tools, the damp footprints leading nowhere. He tried to steady his breathing, forcing himself to think logically. Maybe he'd hallucinated the laughter. Maybe the cabin belonged to some hermit who liked riddles and fear games. But deep down, he already knew that wasn't true. He needed answers. The journal he'd found earlier was still lying near the hearth, its spine cracked, the pages curling from the heat. He flipped to the next entry. The handwriting was shaky, more frantic now. If you're reading this, it means you came back. You always do. The forest won't let you go until you remember. The fire keeps it away, but only for a while. Don't stay after the third night. His hands trembled. Came back? The phrasing unsettled him more than the warning itself. He read on, scanning every line for some hint of meaning. The boy knows. He hides near the river when the fog comes. Find him before it's too late. He slammed the book shut. A boy. The laughter, before doubt could anchor him. He grabbed his backpack and the lantern and stepped out into the grey morning. The forest was eerily still, the fog clinging low to the ground. The compass needle spun wildly in his palm, useless. Still, he walked in the direction he thought the river might be, guided by instinct more than reason. The air grew colder as he descended a slope, until the faint sound of rushing water reached his ears. When he finally found the river, it wasn't the peaceful stream he'd expected. It was wide, dark, moving fast beneath a thin skin of mist. He scanned the banks. "Hello?" His voice cracked the silence, small and uncertain. "Is anyone here?" Something shifted across the river, a small shape darting between trees. He raised the lantern, the light trembling in his hand. The shape paused. For a moment he saw it clearly. A boy, maybe 10 years old, barefoot, wearing a jacket too large for him. His face was hidden by shadows, but the tilt of his head carried an uncanny recognition. "Hey!" he shouted. "Wait!" The boy turned and vanished into the fog. Without thinking, the hiker splashed into the icy river. The water clawed at his legs, dragging him off balance, but he forced his way through, lungs burning. By the time he reached the other side, the boy was gone. He stumbled along the bank, searching. Then he saw it, a small wooden toy boat caught against a rock. He picked it up, shivering. The boat was hand-carved, rough but careful, with the same looping symbol etched into its side, the one from the notes. Suddenly, he heard a whisper behind him. "You're not supposed to be here." He spun around. The boy stood only a few steps away now, eyes wide and solemn. "It's not time yet," the child said softly. "You need to go back. Who are you?" The hiker asked. "Why do you keep running?" The boy shook his head. "You forgot. But the cabin remembers." Before he could move, the fog surged between them, swallowing the boy whole. The air grew thick, heavy, electric. Then silence again. The only sound was the rush of water. He looked down at the toy boat in his hand. It was wet, cold, and carved with a date beneath the symbol. His birth date. He dropped it as if it burned him. The forest had changed when he looked back toward the cabin's direction. The trees seemed denser, the paths unfamiliar. He was lost again. Panic gnawed at his thoughts. He tried following the river, but it twisted endlessly through fog. Hours passed. When he finally stumbled upon the cabin again, the sun was already sinking. But something was wrong. The windows were boarded from the inside. The chimney no longer smoked, and yet faint light flickered through the cracks, the same golden firelight that had drawn him here in the first place. He pressed his face to the window. Someone was inside, sitting in his chair, staring into the fire. It was him. His breath hitched. The figure inside raised its head slowly, as if sensing his presence, and their eyes met through the glass. The same face, the same scar along the temple, the same terrified expression. Then the lantern went out. The darkness pressed close around him, thick and damp, carrying the scent of wet wood and iron. The extinguished lantern left him blind, but he could still feel the weight of the cabin's gaze. It wasn't a structure anymore. It was a living thing, breathing through its cracks, whispering through its warped floorboards. Somewhere inside, the other version of him still sat by the fire. He backed away slowly, heart hammering in his chest. The night had gone silent again, unnaturally so. No wind, no crickets, only the faint pop of unseen embers within. He told himself to move, to run, but his legs stayed rooted. The forest, the cabin, the fog, they all seemed to be waiting for him to make the wrong choice. Finally, he forced himself to speak, his voice trembling. "Who are you?" he whispered, though the answer already gnawed at the edges of his mind. The reflection behind the window turned its head slightly, just enough for him to see its lips move. No sound came out, but he could read the word "remember," and then the sound returned, not gradually but all at once. The forest roared to life, branches cracking, wind howling. The ground beneath his feet trembled. The door of the cabin swung open violently, slamming against the wall. Inside, the fire blazed brighter than before, too bright. The figure by the hearth rose, moving slowly, deliberately, as though it had all the time in the world. The hiker stumbled backward, but his curiosity was stronger than his fear. He had to know. He crossed the threshold. The warmth hit him immediately, the same kind of heat that made the air shimmer on summer roads. The room looked different, cleaner, newer, as though decades had rolled backward. The dust was gone, the floor shone faintly with polish, and on the table sat 2 cups of tea, both steaming. The figure turned. It wasn't a perfect copy anymore. It was younger, stronger, his face lined not by exhaustion but by regret. The younger man smiled faintly. "Took you long enough," he said. His voice was familiar, yet older than it should have been. "I was beginning to think you'd never find the way back." The hiker's throat went dry. "What is this?" The younger man gestured toward the chairs. "Sit. There's something you need to see." Reluctantly he obeyed. The other reached into his coat and pulled out the same note that had first greeted him. The handwriting matched. But this time a new line had been added beneath the warning, "The fire is your memory. If it dies, so do you." He stared, confusion and fear wrestling in his chest. "I don't understand." "You will," said the other him. "You've been walking in circles for years, thinking you're lost. But this place isn't a forest. It's what's left of you. Every trail, every echo, every shadow. They're the pieces you left behind." The hiker looked around the cabin again. The journals on the shelves, the photographs on the mantel, the toy boat on the table. They were his, all of them. "This is where it happened, isn't it?" he asked quietly. The younger version nodded. "You came here to find peace, but instead you buried yourself in the past. The note was supposed to guide you back, but you forgot again and again. Every time you reached this point, you refused to let go." He felt tears sting his eyes. "And the boy? Who is he?" The younger man's smile faltered. "You already know. He's the part of you that still believes you can change how it ended." The hiker's breath caught. The boy's face flashed in his mind, those solemn eyes, that quiet sadness. He saw it now, the same dimples, the same eyes. "My son," he whispered. The fire crackled violently, and the younger self began to fade, his outline blurring into smoke. "You can't stay here much longer," he said. "If you do, the fire will die. And then there'll be nothing left to remember." The cabin began to splinter, the walls groaning. The air filled with heat and ash. "What do I do?" The hiker shouted over the rising roar. "Wake up!" came the reply, faint and distant. "Before sunrise." He stumbled backward as the fire exploded outward, swallowing everything in gold. When he opened his eyes, he was outside again, lying on the frozen ground. The sky was pale gray, the first light of dawn creeping through the trees. The cabin was gone. Only a ring of blackened earth remained, and beside him, half buried in the ash, lay the toy boat. He picked it up carefully. The symbol was still visible, but now, beneath his birth date, another line had appeared. "Remember and be free." He looked up at the rising sun, his breath visible in the cold air. For the first time in years, the forest didn't feel like a maze. It felt like a farewell. He began walking toward the light. Dawn crept slowly across the treetops, turning the mist from silver to pale gold. The hiker moved through it quietly, his steps deliberate, the toy boat held close in his hand like a fragile truth. Every sound seemed sharper now, the crunch of frost underfoot, the distant creak of bending branches, even his own breathing. For the first time, the forest didn't feel hostile. It felt watchful. He paused by a clearing where the fog thinned enough for him to see the horizon. Beyond the trees, the world stretched endlessly, blue and grey and alive. He could almost smell the salt of the ocean he hadn't seen in years. It made him ache with a memory he couldn't fully place. His son laughing as waves chased his feet, the boy's small hand clutching his own. He swallowed hard. The cabin, the journal, the boy, they weren't just fragments of the past. They were his unfinished confession, the moment he'd run from. He sat on a fallen log and opened his pack, finding the journal still there, its pages soot-stained but intact. Turning to the last entry, he found a single new line written in trembling ink. "You have until the sun reaches the tallest pine." He looked up. In the distance, a massive pine tree stood above all others, its trunk scorched halfway up, like it had been struck by lightning. Something inside him stirred, a sense of purpose or perhaps reckoning. He walked. The forest shifted subtly as he moved, the air warming, the light softening. It felt less like he was walking through space and more like through memory itself. He passed a familiar trail marker, carved with the same looping symbol, then another and another. The marks led straight toward the towering pine. When he reached it, the clearing opened wide, a circle of earth that looked both sacred and haunted. At the center lay a small mound of stones, overgrown with moss. A makeshift grave. He froze. Kneeling, he brushed the moss away and saw what was carved beneath. For Daniel. His breath hitched. The name tore something open inside him, something raw and long suppressed. He fell to his knees, pressing a hand to the stones. "Daniel?" The name left his mouth like a prayer and a wound all at once. Images crashed through his mind. Rain, headlights, the squeal of brakes. A car twisted on a mountain road. His son's frightened cry, and then silence. He remembered everything. He had fled into the forest that night, drunk on grief and guilt, searching for an ending that never came. The storm had raged for days, and when it cleared, he had built the cabin with his own hands, trying to bury the past in wood and flame. He'd written the notes to himself, warnings for the man he knew he would become, lost, forgetful, wandering in circles of regret. The boy wasn't haunting him. He was calling him home. Tears blurred his vision as he placed the toy boat gently atop the stones. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for all the years I spent running from you." From this, the wind picked up, carrying his words through the trees. And for a moment, just a breath, he thought he heard laughter again. Not mocking this time, but soft, joyful. The sound of forgiveness. The sunlight reached the tallest pine. A deep calm settled over him. The journal in his pack grew warm, and when he opened it, the pages were blank, save for a single phrase scrawled at the top. "You've remembered. Now go." He stood, taking one last look at the clearing, then turned toward the path that led east. The air shimmered faintly with morning light. As he walked, the forest began to thin, the mist lifting. In the distance he saw a dirt road, a sign of the world he'd forgotten. He smiled faintly. For the first time, the weight in his chest was gone, but as he stepped out of the forest, something stopped him. On the ground ahead lay another note folded neatly, untouched by dew. He picked it up, heart quickening. It read, "If you ever lose your way again, follow the fire. It will always lead you home." The paper crumbled into ash in his hand. Carried off by the wind, he exhaled deeply, whispering to no one in particular, "Thank you." And then, without looking back, he began down the road, toward light, toward memory, toward peace. The road was uneven, carved long ago by logging trucks that no longer came this way. Moss grew thick over the ruts, and tiny white flowers pushed through the cracks where asphalt once held firm. Each step the hiker took felt lighter than the last, though his legs trembled with exhaustion. The forest behind him was slowly disappearing in the morning haze, its trees folding into distance like a dream already beginning to fade. He walked for hours without seeing another soul. The only sound was the rhythmic scrape of his boots and the distant call of a lone bird. The world seemed to breathe again, but peace, he realized, was never simple. At a bend in the road, he came upon a rusted road sign half hidden by vines. He brushed the leaves aside. Pine Hollow, 5 miles. His heart stirred at the name. He knew Pine Hollow. It was where he'd last seen the search party, years ago, or perhaps only yesterday. Memory and time were losing their edges. He pushed on, guided by a sense that something or someone was still waiting. By mid-afternoon, the trees opened to reveal a small town nestled in a valley. Roofs of faded tin, a gas station, a diner with peeling red paint, civilization or what was left of it. Smoke rose faintly from one chimney. He felt almost out of place, like a ghost walking through someone else's life. The bell above the diner door jingled softly as he entered. Inside, it smelled of coffee, grease, and old wood. A woman behind the counter looked up from wiping a glass. She was in her 60s, silver hair tied neatly, eyes sharp but kind. "Morning, stranger," she said. "You look like you've walked through half the mountain." He gave a small smile. "Maybe I have. Coffee?" "Please." She poured him a cup and slid it across the counter. "You passing through or coming home?" He hesitated. "I'm not sure yet." Something flickered in her eyes, recognition perhaps, though she said nothing. She nodded toward a bulletin board near the door. "You remind me of someone used to live around here. Had a little boy, kept to himself mostly." He turned to look. The board was covered with faded flyers and notices, but one photo caught his eye, a weathered missing person poster. Daniel Moore, age 10, last seen near Pine Hollow trailhead. The hiker froze. The edges of the photo curled, but the boy's face remained clear. His son's face. His hand trembled as he reached out, fingertips brushing the paper. The woman watched him quietly, her voice low. "They searched for weeks, you know." Said his father disappeared too. "Cabin fire!" "Tragic thing." He swallowed hard. "That was a long time ago," she nodded slowly. "Long enough for most to forget, but not everyone." He set the coffee cup down and took a deep breath. "Do you still have the trail maps from back then?" She studied him for a long moment, then pulled a drawer open and handed him a folded map, its corners yellowed with age. "Be careful out there," she said softly. "The forest remembers." He managed a faint smile. "I know. I think it's been trying to tell me that outside, the air had grown warmer. The town seemed frozen in time, caught between remembering and letting go." He unfolded the map and traced the old trails with his finger. His eyes fell upon one name, Memory Ridge, a place that hadn't been on any of the newer maps. A faint hum filled his ears, low and steady, like the forest itself was calling him back one last time. He turned north, toward the ridge. As he walked past the edge of town, an old pickup truck rumbled by. The driver, a bearded man in his 50s, slowed and leaned out. "You headed up that way?" he asked. The hiker nodded. The man's expression tightened. "Careful, friend. They say the fire up there never really went out." The hiker gave a weary smile. "I know." He walked on, the map tucked into his coat. The road climbed steadily, the air cooling again. When he looked back one last time, the town was already distant, the diner sign flickering faintly in the wind. Ahead, the trees grew denser, but now they no longer seemed to hide him. They guided him, and as he crossed the boundary where forest met sky, he heard that same soft voice, the one he thought he'd left behind, whisper through the pines, almost home. "Dad," he stopped, tears rising unbidden. The wind carrying warmth instead of chill. For the first time since entering the woods, he smiled without fear. The trail to Memory Ridge was steeper than he remembered, winding like an old thought, trying to find its way back to coherence. Each step crunched over frost and fallen needles, the sound rhythmic, steady, almost meditative. The forest here was quieter, older, heavier with the weight of what had been forgotten. Shafts of sunlight filtered through gaps in the pines, falling on patches of moss that glowed like fragments of another world. By midday, the hiker reached a ridge that opened into a view so vast it pulled the breath from his chest. Below him lay the valley and the faint silhouette of the town, softened by distance. For the first time in years, he felt perspective, the smallness of himself, the enormity of all he had carried. He rested on a flat stone, setting down his pack. The toy boat rested in his coat pocket, warm from his body. He held it carefully now, turning it over in his hands, as if it might still whisper secrets. The carved symbol caught the light, a circle enclosing a flame. A soft wind stirred the treetops, and for a moment he heard the faint echo of laughter again, carried on the air like the forest's own breath. "I'm here," he said quietly. I remembered. The air seemed to shift, the temperature dropping suddenly, though not unpleasantly. The forest leaned in, attentive. He could feel something or someone drawing close. Behind him, the faint crunch of footsteps. He turned slowly. A man was standing at the edge of the trees. His face was familiar, though worn differently, older around the eyes, younger in posture. He looked almost like a reflection glimpsed through rippling water. The same man who had sat by the fire. The same one who had warned him to wake before sunrise. The other him nodded slightly. "You came back." "I had to," the hiker said. "I couldn't leave it unfinished." The reflection smiled faintly. "Few ever do. Most forget before they reach the ridge." He stepped closer, his movements calm, deliberate. "You've remembered your son. That's good. But there's more you've left buried here." The hiker frowned. "What more could there be?" The other reached into his coat and withdrew the journal again. Only this time it was whole, the leather unburned, the pages clean. "This," he said, handing it over. "The last page you never wrote." The hiker opened it. The final page was blank, waiting. "You need to finish it," the reflection said softly. "Write what you couldn't say. It's the only way to leave this place." He sat down again, trembling slightly, the pen feeling heavy in his hand. For a long moment he just stared at the page. Then he began to write. "I forgive myself." The words came haltingly at first, then steadier, "for leaving, for forgetting, for letting grief turn love into fear. I forgive the man who built a cabin to hide from his memories instead of facing them. I forgive the silence that followed. And I forgive the father who couldn't bear to remember his son's voice without breaking." He paused, tears streaking his face. The reflection knelt beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "That's enough," he said gently, but the hiker shook his head. "No, not yet." He took a breath and wrote the final line. "I remember you. Daniel, always." The wind rose suddenly, swirling around them, lifting leaves and ash and light into a spiral that seemed to shimmer with meaning. The forest began to hum, a deep, resonant sound that filled his chest. The reflection's form started to fade, the edges dissolving like smoke. "You've done what you came for," the voice said, now distant but tender. "The fire can rest." The light grew brighter, filling the ridge, blurring the boundaries between tree and sky, between past and present. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then the world exhaled. When the light faded, he was alone again. The forest was quiet, peaceful, ordinary. The journal lay open on his lap, the ink still wet. But when he turned it over, the symbol of the fire had vanished from the cover. He closed it gently, placed it beside the toy boat on the stone, and stood. The ridge stretched before him, leading down into sunlight. The burden was gone. His heart was light. He smiled, whispering, "Goodbye." "Daniel," the breeze answered softly, carrying warmth through the cold air. He started down the trail, the morning bright around him. Every step a promise that forgetting was not the same as loss. Snow began to fall as he descended the ridge, each flake catching light like fragments of ash reborn. The world below was quiet, a soft white unfolding over stone and soil, erasing his footprints almost as soon as they were made. The air smelled clean, pine, frost, and something faintly metallic, like the trace of memory itself. He followed the narrow path until it curved beside a frozen stream. The current murmured faintly beneath the ice, a whisper of movement preserved by winter. He crouched, running a gloved hand across the glassy surface, and for an instant saw the reflection of a cabin, not behind him, but beneath. The shape of it flickered, a faint glow within the stream bed. Artifact, the frozen stream mirror. A reflective current beneath the ice that reveals echoes of the past, showing what the forest remembers rather than what eyes see. He leaned closer. The image shifted. A younger version of himself sat at a table, pen in hand, writing feverishly by firelight. Across from him, a child's shadow played with wooden boats on the floor. The sight hollowed his chest and filled it all at once. He touched the ice again, and the vision wavered like a page turning. "What do you want from me?" he whispered. The forest answered only with the sigh of snow. Yet beneath that stillness he felt presence, gentle, guiding, never cruel. It wanted him to remember fully, not as punishment, but release. He walked on, following the stream until it forked into two directions. To the left, the path sloped down toward the valley. To the right, it climbed toward the old logging road, a route he once took the day he fled this place for good. He hesitated. The wind stirred, carrying a faint voice. "Don't run this time." He turned right. The ascent was grueling, his breath visible in quick bursts, his legs burning with effort. The snow deepened, muffling the world into silence. The toy boat in his pocket seemed heavier, as if it resisted being carried any farther. When he finally reached the road, he found another set of footprints, fresh, leading deeper into the woods. Someone was ahead of him. He followed, heart drumming, every step erasing the line between memory and reality. The prints led to a clearing where a single lantern burned on a stump. The light swayed slightly, untouched by wind. He approached, hand outstretched. A voice spoke from the darkness. "You've come farther than I thought you would." From behind a tree stepped the stranger who had once met him by the fire, the same voice that had urged him awake, that had haunted his dreams since. The hiker froze. "You're real." The man tilted his head. "So are you," he gestured toward the lantern. "You left this?" "No," the man said gently. "You did. Long ago when you promised to return and never did." The hiker's throat tightened. "Why are you here?" "To walk you home." They stood in silence as the lantern's light flickered between them, a small flame bridging two versions of the same soul. The hiker felt something loosen inside him, a thread pulling toward completion. He glanced at the frozen stream below, then back at the man. "Then let's go." The stranger smiled faintly, the kind of smile one gives at the end of a long vigil. Together they walked, the snow closing behind them like the final page of a long-forgotten book. As they went, the forest began to hum again. Low, rhythmic, ancient. The path brightened, not with sunlight but with memory's quiet glow. The lantern's light never dimmed. By dawn, the sky was the color of ash and frost. The hiker and the stranger walked in silence, their breath rising in pale ribbons. The trail widened into an open hollow, where old pines leaned like watchful sentinels. Beneath them stood what looked like an altar, stone and wood, half buried by snow, etched with the same spiral patterns from the cabin walls. Artifact, the stone altar of echoes, a relic built generations ago to preserve voices of those lost in the forest. It resonates with words unspoken, granting closure to the souls still wandering. The stranger stopped before it, resting a gloved hand on the edge. "This is where your father waited for you," he said quietly. The hiker's pulse thudded. "My father's dead. He was when you found him," the stranger replied. "But not before he found this place." The altar began to hum, a low vibration spreading through the ground, up his legs, into his chest. He stepped forward, kneeling beside it. The carvings shimmered faintly as his breath touched the stone. Memories returned in fragments, the day he'd gone missing as a child, the search parties, the endless echo of his name shouted through the woods. He remembered running toward a light, finding the cabin's door open, and hearing a man's voice say, "Stay here, son. I'll be right back." But his father never came back, only silence. Only years. The hiker's hands trembled as he touched the spiral. He came back here. He never left, said the stranger. His spirit became the forest's keeper, the one who built the fires you found. The air shimmered, and the stranger's form began to blur. The hiker realized with a jolt that he was seeing two faces at once, the stranger's and his father's, overlapping like an image misaligned. I was, the man said softly, but you called me here again when you returned. You've carried the weight long enough. The altar pulsed, and suddenly the hiker heard whispers, his own voice at different ages, calling, crying, promising to never forget. All his regrets poured into the cold morning air. He felt the warmth of his father's hand settle on his shoulder. It's time, Ethan. His name broke him. Tears stung his eyes. I didn't mean to leave you. I know. Light poured from the altar, pale and soft like dawn. Around them the forest glowed, every branch, every stone, alive with memory. The snow melted in rings around the altar, revealing the faint outline of a circle carved into the earth. You found the cabin because it was your home once, said the voice. The note wasn't a warning, it was a promise. That when the fire burned again, you'd finally be ready to remember. Ethan bowed his head. What happens now? His father's form smiled through the fading light. Now you live, and the forest rests. The humming quieted. The light dimmed, and when Ethan opened his eyes again, he stood alone beside the extinguished altar, the snow untouched, the footprints gone. Only the toy boat remained in his hand, its edges smoothed, its sail unbroken. He placed it gently upon the stone, and for a moment the wind moved around him like a sigh of peace. Then, slowly, he turned toward the trail leading out of the forest. The forest thinned as Ethan followed the trail toward the valley. The air felt different now, lighter though touched with melancholy. He could still sense his father's presence, not as a shadow, but as warmth, like the last trace of fire in cooled embers. Artifact, the wooden compass, discovered in Ethan's jacket pocket. Its needle spins not toward north, but toward closure. It guides not through direction, but through acceptance. He hadn't noticed it before. An old round compass carved with the same spirals from the altar. When he opened it, the needle trembled and pointed toward the rising sun. He smiled faintly. Guess you're still watching, he murmured. The path widened, leading to the edge of the forest. Beyond it stretched a small, forgotten village. Abandoned homes half collapsed, roofs bowed under decades of neglect. But as he walked through, he realized some of the houses looked familiar. One porch had the same rocking chair from his childhood home. A cracked window still held the paper stars he once made with his mother. The memories weren't just echoes, they were pieces of a life hidden beneath time. In the center of the village stood a sign, barely legible under lichen and frost. Greystone Hollow. The name struck deep. He'd heard it before in old news clippings, the town swallowed by the forest after a fire decades ago. His family's name was among the missing. He stopped before a ruined chapel. The doors hung open, and inside, a single pew stood upright. On it rested an oil lamp still faintly glowing, though no one had tended it. He stepped closer, heart steady, and beside the lamp found a photograph. It showed his father, young and smiling, standing in front of the same cabin he'd found days ago. A boy stood beside him, Ethan, no older than 6, so it was real. The cabin, the fire, the note, all connected through the past. As he studied the picture, something shifted in the air. The scent of pine and smoke mixed with something else. Home. The faint sound of a lullaby hummed from the chapel's rafters, one his mother used to sing before storms. He sat on the pew, the compass open in his palm. The needle turned slowly, then stilled, pointing not outward, but back toward the forest. He didn't need to follow it. He understood now. The compass wasn't meant to lead him away, but to remind him that closure isn't found in escape, but in return. For a long while, he just sat there, breathing. The quiet was deep, but not empty. When he finally rose, he took the lamp with him, carrying it through the hollow until he reached the forest's edge again. Behind him, the village shimmered faintly like mist dissolving at dawn. He whispered, "Thank you." Then he kept walking until the trees gave way to open road. A car passed. A ranger's truck. The driver stopped, lowering the window. "You all right, sir?" "You've been off-grid for a while," Ethan smiled faintly. "I think I finally found my way back," the ranger nodded, eyes curious but kind. "Where were you staying?" "In a cabin," Ethan said, glancing toward the forest. "But it's gone now." They drove in silence as the sun climbed higher. Ethan looked down at the compass in his hand, its needle unmoving, its purpose fulfilled. He felt peace for the first time in years. Artifact. The letter in the jacket lining. A final message from Ethan's father, hidden years ago and rediscovered by chance, revealing not a mystery, but understanding. Weeks later, Ethan sat on the porch of a lakeside cabin, a real one this time, with neighbors, laughter, and the smell of coffee drifting through morning air. He'd moved to a small town near the edge of the same forest, drawn by something between longing and peace. The old ranger helped him find it, insisting he looked like someone who needed quiet but not solitude. While unpacking a worn jacket, his fingers brushed against a seam. Something thin crinkled beneath the lining. He pulled at the stitching gently until a folded paper slid free, a letter yellowed with time. The handwriting was unmistakable. "His father's Ethan," it began. "If you ever find this, it means you've made it back. I knew the forest would call you home when you were ready. Don't carry what isn't yours anymore. The past doesn't need to be solved. It only needs to be remembered kindly." Tears welled, but they were warm, not bitter. He folded the letter, placed it on the small table, and looked out toward the tree line. The morning sun shimmered through mist, like breath exhaled by the earth itself. Somewhere beyond those trees lay the cabin, the altar, and the ashes of everything he thought was unfinished. He picked up the toy boat, the same one from the altar, somehow resting on his porch railing as though the wind had returned it. He set it gently on the lake's still surface. It drifted slowly, catching light, sailing toward the reflection of the rising sun. Ethan exhaled, a quiet smile breaking across his face. "You were right, Dad," he whispered. "I'm home." The lake rippled once, then stilled. A soft wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and smoke, a final echo of the forest saying farewell. For a long while, Ethan stayed there, watching the water. No ghosts remained, no echoes called, only life present and steady. And when the lamp on his porch flickered, he didn't look back in fear. He simply nodded, knowing that some fires never die. They only wait for the right soul to see their light again.